Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για την ευγενική πρόσκληση. Είναι μεγάλη τιμή για μένα να δώσω την εναρκτήρια ομιλία στο συνέδριο αυτό. Μετά από την συνεννόηση που είχαμε τους οργανωτές, αποφασίσαμε ότι η ομιλία θα είναι στα αγγλικά για διάφορους λόγους. Ο πρώτος είναι ότι, από ό,τι κατάλαβα, υπάρχουν αρκετοί στο κοινό που δεν γνωρίζουν ελληνικά και άρα είναι ζήτημα ευγένειας να προσπαθήσει κάποιος να τους φροντίσει όσο γίνεται καλύτερα. Ο δεύτερος λόγος είναι ότι, ξεκινώντας και μόνο από τον τίτλο, από την πρώτη λέξη, θα έχουμε κατακαιρματισμό της μετάφρασης, γιατί evidence-based medicine, evidence-based medical care, υπάρχουν μερικές δεκάδες τρόποι για να μεταφραστεί. Συνήθως εγώ το μεταφράζω τεκμηριωμένη ιατρική, τεκμηριωμένη φροντίδα υγείας. Κάποιες μέρες το μεταφράζω αποδεικτική ιατρική, είμαι και εγώ κατακαιρματισμένος. Άλλοι το μεταφράζουν η ιατρική που στηρίζεται σε τεκμήρια, η ιατρική που στηρίζεται σε ενδείξεις, η ιατρική των ενδείξεων, η ιατρική των δεδομένων, στοιχειοθετημένη ιατρική, η ιατρική που στηρίζεται σε ενδείξεις και δεδομένα. Υπάρχουν μερικές δεκάδες, δωδεκάδες, ντουζίνες από μεταφράσεις. Θα έλεγα υπάρχουν περισσότεροι τρόποι να μεταφραστεί αυτό από ότι οι ερευνητές που ασχολούνται με την evidence-based X στην Ελλάδα. Και αυτό δημιουργεί αμέσως την πρώτη δυσκολία. Η δεύτερη δυσκολία είναι ότι θα σας μιλήσω όντως για κάτι που είναι λίγο φοβιστικό. Αυτή η evidence-based medicine είναι όχι μόνο κατακαιρματισμένη, αλλά και αποσπασματική και σπασμένη και διεφθαρμένη και συμποσούμενη με κάποια προσπάθεια να συμπηληθεί, να συγκροτηθεί, να συνενωθεί, η οποία όμως είναι σε εξέλιξη. Let's go for that. So, evidence-based X started as a term around 1990 by David Eddy, who wrote that we need to consciously anchor a policy not to current practices or the beliefs of experts, you know, like a ridiculous expert like myself, but to experimental evidence. And evidence is floating around. It's like a beast that you need to hunt in the jungle, and it must be identified, described, and analyzed. Then David Sackett, in a paper along with other colleagues in 1996, said that evidence-based medicine is the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions about the care of individual patients, and it means integrating individual clinical expertise with the best available external clinical evidence from systematic research. So you have lots of seeds of promising tools here and promising ideas, but you also have the seeds of the roots of evil on how evidence-based medicine could go wrong downstream. So why do I say that EBM is segmented, fragmented, broken, and weirdly collated? Segmented means that each discipline, specialty, or professional group or healthcare stakeholder, like each one of us, including myself, has his or her own EBM that serves its interests. Okay? I have some EBM in my mind, and I'm trying to make the most out of it. I'm trying to get the most. Some people try to get the most in terms of money. Other people try to get the most out of fame. Others in terms of podium time. But each one of us is trying to get the most. Fragmented means that within and between segments, evidence is fragmented and very difficult or frankly impossible to make sense of. I have to say I have been working in this field for several decades now, and very often my conclusion after looking in a specific field is I just give up. I can't really make sense of it. Broken means that agendas with major conflicts have hijacked EBM. The evidence is largely, although not entirely broken, and the question is which part is broken and which part is still okay, so that we can go after that latter part. And collated means that our efforts to synthesize evidence can be, but should not be, the worst of the problems that we're facing. About a year ago, I was asked to write a memorial commentary for David Sackett, my mentor who had passed away, and I wrote that piece with the title, Evidence-Based Medicine Has Been Hijacked. The pirates have taken over the ship. And I tried to describe who are these people? Who are these stakeholders? What are these dark forces that have hijacked evidence-based medicine all over the world, including clearly the United States, but hardly any other country would escape from that hijacking. Let's go back to the basics. So this is a very fundamental concept of evidence-based medicine. It says, well, I need to tell you how to run your life in healthcare and how to make the best choices, and I need to have some hierarchy of the different pieces of evidence that will guide you in these decision-making. So typically, you have meta-analysis and systematic reviews on the top of the pyramid, and then you have randomized clinical trials, randomized controlled trials next to it, kind of building the foundation that would lead to their synthesis with systematic reviews. And then you have observational evidence and retrospective studies and case reports. And then the least important is experts. Again, experts like me talking to you now. Don't give too much attention to what I'm saying. And recently, there's even a new layer at the bottom of that, which includes mostly tweets that, you may believe, you may not believe, lots of fake news, lots of policy changing the world, through Twitter. Well, how did things look when evidence-based medicine or evidence-based X was coined in 1990? The key tools of medicine and of healthcare and of medical care at that time were splendidly serving vested interests. So you had mostly ex cathedra pronouncements by prestigious opinion leaders in various conferences. This is a conference, so beware. Lots of editorials, non-systematic reviews, again, written by famous or seemingly famous people, professional society guidelines done for the glory of the profession, pamphlets from drug reps, and other marketing material disseminated in medical, quote-unquote, scientific meetings. Well, things have changed. In the meanwhile, we realized that there were other contestants beyond those fighting for getting the largest piece of the pie of evidence-based medicine. There were also other specialties that were really far away, like people working in biological sciences that were thinking about mechanisms, and they wanted to get a Nobel Prize, and they said, EBM has lots of money, so why don't we try to get some of that? So you have now a pyramid of clinical or healthcare evidence, you have a pyramid of observational evidence, you have a pyramid of mechanistic evidence, and you have lots of other evidences, and you also have lots of sand in the desert, because most of these pyramids hardly communicate with each other. If you go to one meeting that is based on one pyramid, you will hear one message. If you go to another meeting, you will think, oh, these other people must have been really crazy and had no clue what they were talking about. What is going on in 2017? What are the key tools of still non-evidence-based medicine 2017, which are still splendidly serving vested interests? Well, we have made progress in our world. We have practice guidelines that are based on seemingly rigorous but segmented partisan processes. We have systematic reviews and meta-analysis. We have randomized trials. We have observational studies in risk factor epidemiology, meet bias at large, the works, X-omics, predictive medicine, precision medicine, personalized medicine, individualized medicine, each one with its little pyramid building up, brave new worlds for a single person who can spend all the money in the world for his or healthcare, and physicians in the middle of that, or healthcare professionals trying to make sense of that, navigate that mess, survive that mess, make use of that mess. Evidence is less than optimal. Usually these pyramids are just destroyed. This is a pyramid in Abu Rawash that there's not much of it left. And also, pyramids can be bulldozed, and the main reason for that is usually money, money, money. This is a pyramid that has been destroyed by property developers in Peru, and in healthcare there's tons of money. As you just heard, the minister is not here because he's trying to get more money. Everybody's trying to get more money. In communist countries, in socialist countries, in right-wing parties, in Nazi parties, everybody wants to get money. Each specialty is also trying to maximize its clients. So if you are a specialist, you want to be respected. You want to have many clients who have faith in you, who believe in you, who are waiting outside your door and you know, the longer they wait, because there's more people waiting, the better you feel. You know, you're more famous. So specialists create disease. If you're a good specialist, you will create more disease. So disease monitoring is highly prevalent. Broader definition of disease, illness, and what is the treatable range is becoming commonplace practically in any field. So if you were not hypercholesterolemic a couple of years ago, you are now. If you were not hypertensive 4 weeks ago, you are now. I bet 87% of you are hypertensives. Check it out, okay? If you didn't have metabolic syndrome a few years ago, you have metabolic syndrome now. You have prediabetes, you have everything. You're gonna die, you know that? Okay, I'm serious. So experts from different specialties treating the same condition rarely communicate, okay? They build their own world, they build their own pyramid, they build their own, everybody needs to be treated by me, but they rarely communicate with each other. And this is one example. This looks like a very, very esoteric figure, but let me tell you what it is about. This is treatment for basal cell carcinoma. It's the most common cancer. Most of the time, the large majority is benign, but you know, it's usually useful to just take it out, especially if it seems to be causing any problem, even just aesthetic problem. So what are the approaches to treat that very common condition that many of you may have right now as we are speaking? Again, you know, find the specialist. There's 3 major families of specialists. There is dermatologists who are medical dermatologists and have conservative treatments like ointments, creams, a little bit local stuff. And these are at the bottom circles. There's surgery, like Mohs surgery and surgical excision, that is done by surgical dermatologists. And there's aggressive treatments like photodynamic therapy, cryotherapy, radiation, and so forth. So the 3 families hardly communicate with each other. The aggressive and the surgical have some treaty, okay? So they do communicate and they can refer clients to each other. They run clinical trials within their own world, testing their own therapies. Very often you see these auto loops. This means that they test their own therapy against its own self. And hardly any communication between the conservative medical versus the aggressive surgical. There's just 1 or 2 small randomized trials where there's tons of trials within each specialty. Each specialty has its professional meetings, it has its own professional societies, it has its own professional guidelines, it has its own professional agendas, it has its own professional X. It doesn't care about the others. It treats the same thing as the others, but they never get in touch. A sad realization, therefore, is that EBM is widely tolerated only when it can produce mostly boring evidence reports that can be endorsed by experts and or serve vested interests of 1 or more clans. Clans, mafia, simoria, you can translate it again in many different ways in a rich Greek language. The very same people who were previously spitting when mentioning EBM, I believe that. Did anyone spit to me today? No. Are now using the very same term to buttress their eminence-based medicine claims to prestige by misusing the tools of evidence-based medicine. So what we get is what I call MMM. It's not M&M, you know, it's MMM, which is the medical misinformation mess. And we described that mess in a paper a few months ago, and this is how it runs. Much published medical research is not reliable or is of uncertain reliability, offers no benefit to patients, or is not useful to decision makers. Most healthcare professionals are not aware of this problem. Even if they are aware of this problem, most healthcare professionals lack the skills necessary to evaluate the reliability and usefulness of medical evidence. Patients and families frequently lack relevant, accurate medical evidence and skill guidance at the time of medical decision making. So, is that just a theoretical construct? Unfortunately, it is not. And here is some evidence to prove that the evidence is in bad shape. About a year ago, we published that paper where we looked at all the Cochrane database systematic reviews that had been published over a year and a half. Close to 1,400 systematic reviews on about 1,400 medical topics where physicians, healthcare practitioners are seeking to find advice. What do we know about what is the best thing to do for this condition? We found grades of recommendation, assessment, development, and evaluation assessments only 43% of the time. What happened to the other 56, 57%? They had none because most of the time there was absolutely no evidence to appraise. If there's no evidence, what are you going to grade? When there was evidence to use that tool, the quality of the evidence for the first listed primary outcome was high only 13% of the time. And among the reviews that had high quality of evidence, eventually there were only 25 that had both significant results and a favorable interpretation of the intervention, which means that eventually, starting with 1,400 medical topics or questions, there's only about 2% or less where you have good evidence, high quality evidence, significant results, and someone is saying, you know what? I know what to tell you what to do. In the others, you will hear mostly, we need more studies. We don't really know. The evidence is weak. Studies are biased. And then, if you have that, here comes the expert that can use that vacuum of evidence-based medicine to build his or her career. How about significance of the evidence? Can we at least somehow create a coalition and use only results that are statistically significant? Well, the problem is that almost all results are statistically significant. And even those that are not, they have some way to become significant. All my proposals that I send for funding, I will say that I'm doing something extremely significant, even though I have to say that I submit mostly mediocre ideas for funding. If I have some good idea, which rarely happens, I'm not going to submit it for funding. It's not going to be funded. So recently, we looked at the entire PubMed. There's 27 million abstracts and lots of full-text articles. From 1990 to 2015, 96% of papers that use p-values in their abstracts had statistically significant results. About 1 million full-text papers that we analyzed with text mining of the entire text, again, 96% had statistically significant results. If statistical significance used to work in the time of R.A. Fisher, who proposed that, it's not working any longer. Everything is significant. You cannot take that to the bank and say, because it is statistically significant, that means that it means anything. Almost any result can be obtained. This is a statue of Janus, a Greek-Roman god who could face in both directions. And this is what you see pretty much in all observational research, and more than just observational research. If you give me any database, I can get you any result you want. Promise, your money back. But you will pay a lot. I need to make a lot of money. That's the game. So how do you get that? This is analysis of data from the National Household Survey in the US. And just take a look at the final panel. These are associations of vitamin E levels with the risk of death. And this is the minus log 10 p-value. This is the hazard ratio, technical details. There's about 1 million points here. So I have analyzed that same data set in 1 million different ways. How do I do that? If I'm looking for the risk of death, there's different things that can affect your risk of death, like your age, your gender, whether you have heart attack history, whether you have cancer history, whether you exercise, whether X or Y. So for each one of those, you have two options. 2 times 2 times 2, 2 to the 20th is about 1 million. So this is 1 million results. 70% of those, 700,000 analysis suggests that vitamin E is decreasing your risk of death. 30% of the analysis, 300,000 analysis suggests that vitamin E increases the risk of death. So depending on what you like, I can get you the preferable result, the desirable result. Most research about humans does not care about humans. Most research about patients does not care about patients. Patient-relevant outcomes are understudied. This is a field view of a discipline, preterm medicine, that is probably one of the most relevant for human health, and one that is one of the most sensitized about the need to have evidence about human outcomes and patient-relevant outcomes. They are the field that pretty much launched the Cochrane collaboration, and they're very well versed in randomized trials and the need to generate and accrue evidence. Nevertheless, if you look at 1,041 trials that field has conducted, chronic lung disease, which is the most important outcome for preterm infants, has been reported only in less than a third of them. 2/3 of these studies have been done, but have not really reported what was the most important thing for these kids. Contradiction and refutation are very common. You've seen that in the news, but you will see it even in the breast crème de la crème of the medical literature. If you look at the 45 highest impact, largest number of citation papers in the history of clinical medicine, about 30% of them have been refuted within a few years. Many treatment effects for intervention seem to be large, but almost always, when you search for them, they come from very small, poorly done biased studies. Whenever we perform larger studies, these large effects go away. 99% of the time, large effects disappear, either completely or what remains is very small. Quality does cause problems. We have lots of meta-epidemiological evidence that suggests that if we have some basic problems in the design of studies, like in randomized trials, if you have a problem in the quality of the randomization, or in allocation concealment, or in blinding, you will get results that are off by 10%, by 20%, by 40%. The problem is that I cannot tell you for each particular study how much off they will be. I can tell you what would happen on average, but this is not really helping us to just correct the literature by saying, there's 25 biases in this study, I will correct for these 25 and it will get you the right answer. There's no way to do it, unfortunately. We either do it right or we just create a mess. Another confounding factor is that it's not Europe and the US any longer in terms of clinical research and research that informs healthcare. Much clinical research that informs healthcare decisions nowadays is happening outside the US and Europe, but are the results unbiased? In a way, I feel that we have taught the Chinese and the Indian scientists all the errors that we have made, and they do them very well. So here's one example. This is a meta-analysis for case fatality with calcium antagonism in aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage. If you look at studies that were done in Europe and the US, practically there's no benefit. If you look at a single study that was done in China, the odds ratio is 0.15. This is like the best treatment that you can ever get. There's really not treatments out there that for such serious outcomes you would have 85% reduction in the odds. I mean, just seeing that, you can say that's clearly not possible. But it's there. And what's wrong? Maybe there were 5 other Chinese studies that found completely opposite results, but coming from China and having negative results. Who is that Chu and Lai guy? Why should we publish a negative result from that unknown place? Maybe they got refuted, even though their results were equally good or even better than the one trial that was published with these extreme outcomes. This is a paper in New England Journal of Medicine that came under fire, and then the authors started wondering, what's going on here? They realized that the effectiveness of spironolactone was very different in different places. Well, a little difference makes sense. We're all different at different hospitals, yeah, but here we were talking about major benefit, absolutely no benefit, or even harm. So they went back and they realized that the clinical sites that had recruited patients in Russia and in Georgia practically had completely different results. Practically, it seems, they had not even been treating the patients as they were supposed to. I don't know if the patients were fake. I mean, this is still being investigated or were fantasized. But practically, they didn't have the same randomized experience as the rest of the randomized cohort. Then comes the industry. The poor industry. They want to make money, and they spend a lot of money. And they are told that they need to finance the studies from which they will make money. I think this is extremely unfair to the industry. They're told to go in a gallery where there's paintings, and one of them is theirs, and they have to say, which painting will win the prize? Will they select someone else's painting? No way. So they sometimes run randomized trials where they compare their product against another product, head-to-head comparison, and then 96.5% of the time, their product gets favorable results. I would say we can skip that step. Why do we need randomized trials? 97% success? I'll give you 100%. Let's go on and not waste that money. Are these studies bad? No, they're just another way of the segmentation of the system. The company is designing this study knowing that no matter what happens, it will show non-inferiority. The non-inferiority margin is presented in the design to be so large that there's no way that you will miss that. So it's a predetermined outcome in a way. Can we even trust the data? Are we fragmenting ourselves even? This is a famous trial that was published in 2001. Study 329 was the avant-garde of the pharmaceutical industry to promote the use of antidepressants in the general population, and in that case specifically for adolescents and kids. It showed that antidepressants are very effective and extremely safe. 15 years later, BMJ published a reanalysis of the very same data of the same trial by independent authors. It showed that the antidepressants were not effective at all and highly harmful. The very same data. How many trials do we have access to this type of information? Very few. When a couple of years ago we looked at how many trials had been reanalyzed, we found 37 such, and 35% of the time the conclusion of the reanalysis was entirely opposite compared to the conclusion of the original analysis. These are randomized trials. To make it even worse, the reanalysts were the same as the original analysts. So they were destroying their own study. Not exactly, but in an environment where in order to publish another paper from the same data set, you need to say something new. These people said something completely contradictory to their original paper. So now they got two papers, one saying treat, the other saying not treat, and try to make sense out of that. There are efforts to try to collate these fragmented pieces, and some journals have taken a fierce stance that we will not publish a randomized trial unless you promise, you pledge, that the raw data and the protocol will be available. So BMJ and PLOS Medicine have done that for a couple of years now. So we went to all the trialists who had published their work in the BMJ or PLOS Medicine since the policy has been in place, and we asked them, can we get your data? 46% of them did send the data, so you can see it as half full or half empty. And the good news is that we reanalyzed all these trials, and with two exceptions where we found some errors, the results were identical. The two errors, even those errors were not really that bad. They would not affect the final conclusion whether we should treat or not with the tested intervention. So for the select sample of the most transparent journals and the most transparent investigators who are willing to share everything and have no problem to share everything, things look good. This is about 0.1% of the total at the moment, but hopefully this will grow larger. Can we replace our gaps with observational data? There's a lot of interest to do that. And there's lots of databases. I have lots of data in my computer with millions of patients that I can launch p-values against you like a nuclear arsenal that you can destroy the world with p-values. We collect tons of data for no reason, okay? These data, damn it, they will be collecting themselves. Even if we say, no, I don't want them, they will just go ahead and get collected. So we have lots of routinely collected data, and everybody now can do research with these data, and this is what happens. This is an analysis where we looked at routinely collected data, addressing a question that had not been addressed by randomized trials, and then some years later you have a randomized controlled trial addressing the same question. The difference is huge. These are mortality outcomes, and at an odds ratio scale, we're 31% off. Most mortality benefits are like 3%. So the noise is like 10 times the typical signal that we're chasing. Everybody wants to make more money, as I said up front. So most drugs are pushed as fast as forward to be approved. For many years now, we have accelerated approvals. With the new government in the US, we'll have even more accelerated approvals, and I think the same probably will happen in Europe. This is an analysis of accelerated approvals. You see that cancer is pretty much dominating that field, but also HIV and several other diseases have a strong trend. What is happening is that these drugs get approved, but then there is some thought that, well, at some point we will get the evidence. Don't worry, let's get it out there so that patients who are dying will get it now and we'll find out. Yes, we do run lots of trials downstream, but they're not about whether the drug is effective or not. Once licensed, the drug is gone. Actually, the trials that we do that try to test whether the accelerated approved drug is effective show that typically it's not effective in terms of major outcomes. But it's used now as a backbone to build a yet newer drug on top of that. So everybody's getting the accelerated licensed drug, and on top of it, they add another one or two more or three more that also need to be acceleratedly approved. This is the difference for the start time for evaluation trials and the background trials. On average, about a 1.5 year window of opportunity for testing, was that really effective that got approved? And this is the time window for the trials in the initially approved indications versus other indications, practically no window. Other indications are tested at the same time as the ones that were approved. I will close with some remarks about collating evidence. Systematic reviews and meta-analysis are something that I'm very fond of. I believe that they can be helpful, but they're also becoming a problem. They are out of control. As of mid-2017, I looked and I found close to 100,000 published meta-analysis articles indexed in PubMed, about 1,000 new ones indexed every month, approximately 250,000 published systematic reviews, and about 2,500 new ones indexed every month. This is how it looks like. I published that work in Melbourne Quarterly, and I made lots of enemies from my own friends, I think. This is the meta-analysis epidemic or pandemic, a geometric exponential growth. Is this useful? These evidence synthesis tools have become the most powerful and influential tool of EBM. That's our one hope, to try to get that segmentation and fragmentation collated. However, this means that if they're so powerful, they have also been hijacked to serve various segmented agendas. Most of them are really not useful. Here's a few examples. This is meta-analysis as just a way to make a CV. China was publishing absolutely nothing until 2005. By 2010, they overtook the US. By 2014, they were publishing about 80% of the global genetic meta-analysis literature. If you look at these papers, they look wonderful. They fulfill all the quality criteria. If you ask how many of them are correct, it's close to 0%. Because what they do is they collate fragmented data that we know for many years now that they're highly subject to systematic biases like selection reporting bias. And we know that when we have tried to validate these associations that these meta-analyses publish in large consortia with very careful statistical methods and very careful validation, only 1% of those survive. Industry is joining the game. Why not? Meta-analysis is so important. Why should John and Nick and Anthony do them? Industry should do them as well. And they have their contracting companies. There's about 100 major contracting companies whose business is to run meta-analysis like crazy. I have no way, you have no way to compete against them. Maybe some of you are working in one of them? I don't know. Well, they publish some of them, but the vast majority are done for the industry, and if the results are nice, they will get published. If the results are not nice, they will not get published. As simple as that. Even in the most sophisticated types of designs, we end up having multiple meta-analysis. This is from a paper that we just published in IGE with Florian Odette and Edward Schuett. And there's some topics where even network meta-analysis that are really very sophisticated, there's more than a dozen different published papers that have done network meta-analysis. And this is looking at biologics for rheumatoid arthritis. There's 28 network meta-analysis. This is the type of interventions that they consider. There's not 2 of them that look at the same interventions. And this is looking at how many trials they have included out of the totality of trials and the totality with full searches that they could have included. None of these extremely sophisticated endeavors includes more than 50% of the evidence. Most include less than 20% of the evidence. And this is the most inclusive of all. What results do they get with that fragmented effort? Well, the results are all over the place. If you consider comparing different types of biologics for rheumatoid arthritis, if you believe this meta-analysis, the results are better for adalimumab. If you believe this one, they're better for etanercept. If you believe that one, there's no difference. If you believe that one, there's absolutely no difference. Again, you can pick and choose whichever you prefer and build based on that. These are 4 meta-analyses done by some of the best meta-analysts in the world. I say so because they're very good friends of mine, and before I attack them, I need to say that they're really stellar. They are. They're among the best methodologists that you can find in the world of evidence synthesis. So the question is, which one is the best antidepressant? And you have here the ranking of antidepressants. If you believe the first one, and if this were to work, but it doesn't, but just look at the first column, paroxetine is the best, is the champion. If you look at the last column, paroxetine is number 10, pretty much among the very worst. Sertraline, according to that last one, is the second best. According to others, is the worst. So here you have meta-analysis done by the best teams in the world, looking very carefully at the same data, but getting so discrepant answers from each other. Is meta-analysis then becoming just a marketing tool? Perhaps it is. If you look more broadly, there's not just 4 meta-analyses on antidepressants, there's 185 published within 6 years. And if I were to update that, there will probably be about 300. If you look at their conclusions, first of all, you realize that 79% of them have some industry involvement. Second, you realize that what drives their conclusion is mostly whether industry employees were involved. So those meta-analyses where industry employees were involved were 22 times less likely to have any negative statements about the drug that was being meta-analyzed. Actually, only one paper that had some industry employee on board said anything bad about antidepressants. I think that person is no longer employed by that company, actually. So even when you try to collate evidence, you have to be very careful. This is the pie of meta-analyses that are currently produced. Some remain unpublished, others are redundant, unnecessary, decent but not useful, misleading, abandoned genetics, flawed beyond repair. About 3% are decent and clinically useful. These might save the world, but it's only 3%. So I argue that we need to reverse the paradigm. We've had a party. The party has gone on for too long. It's time to become serious. I would move from poor primary data and retrospective systematic reviews to prospective meta-analysis, the key type of primary research. We need to design meta-analysis networks prospectively, have teams join forces worldwide covering the whole spectrum of interested specialties and stakeholders. The data would be incorporated prospectively. The geometry of the comparisons to be assessed for interventions would be pre-designed, and the next study will be designed based on enhancing, improving the network of all data and maximizing its informativity. If we do that, maybe we have some good starting point to also try to do some work to improve guidelines. Guidelines are also a huge mess, and I can waste another 1 hour, but I just refer you to that paper that we wrote in the BMJ along with Jeannie Lenzer and other colleagues, where we created a list of red flags that should make you worry about a guideline not being so trustworthy. About 85% of currently produced guidelines have 1 or more red flags. To conclude, evidence-based medicine is about integrating individual clinical expertise with the best external evidence. That's really great, but what happens in reality is that clinicians and other healthcare stakeholders are under tremendous market pressure. Most department meeting discussions are about money, and this is mostly becoming finance-based medicine. Clinicians in most countries are incentivized to capture the largest possible market share, to satisfy customers in their shop, to get high satisfaction scores, to charge more for their services, to perform more procedures, to tick off more items on charge forms. A logical consequence is that, is it likely that physicians will design studies that threaten their jobs, decreasing their procedures, testing, and interventions that they do? Will they design studies that say that their specialty should just disappear, should become extinct, if this is really for the benefit of patients in healthcare? Otherwise, is EBM doomed to be heartily accepted only when it leads to more medicine and more medical care, even if this means less health? I'm worried about evidence-based medicine. Over the years, I have fought for evidence-based medicine to be recognized, but now I think that I feel threatened by evidence-based medicine because it's no longer evidence-based medicine. It has acquired tremendous power, but most evidence is either problematic, spurious, false, or has no utility for medical and shared decision-making. The main utility of efforts to collate, like systematic reviews and meta-analysis, has been to reveal problems with the biomedical evidence. Expectations of replacing experimental randomized trials with non-randomized data need to be tempered. Conflicts of interpretation need to be minimized for primary trials, meta-analysis, and guidelines. Prospective network meta-analysis may become the gold standard, hopefully, for primary clinical research. EBM should not be segmented and fragmented. I will close with special thanks to you for having tolerated me to run over time, but the organizers told me to do that. And also with special thanks to some of my collaborators. It's impossible to show all the very talented people that have worked with me over the years and have also tolerated me. If it were not for them, I think I would not have been here to try to convey that message tonight. So, a million thanks.